You're watching a KSL News Special, Road to Understanding.
Good evening. On the Road to Understanding tonight, we're bringing your questions to Utah's congressional representatives.
We have all four members of the House delegation here in studio with us. Representative Jason Chaffetz, Mia Love, District 4, Chris Stewart, District 2, Rob Bishop, District 1.
We've compiled the questions you submitted over the last week, totaling over 130 from different folks from across the entire state.
And we heard definite themes and issues that Utahns want answers to. The majority of the questions we received focus on health care, followed by public lands, investigation into the Trump campaign ties to Russia, and then general legislation.
Questions about the Trump administration in general followed, plus questions about access to your representative, political partisanship, and the environment.
Other questions touch on a variety of topics, including education, immigration, net neutrality, and women's rights. But we wanted to start things off with a question that helps set the tone for part of the reason we're doing this tonight. Concerns from constituents about their ability to access the four of you.
Rob Bishop, he's my representative. I would just like to ask him, why we haven't had any town halls yet. He's been in the state several times in many of the past recesses, and yet he's not been in contact with any of his constituents. So when do we get a chance? When do we get to speak to our congressman in person?
That question directed at you, Representative Bishop, but we did hear that question related to all four of you. So would you begin and address when you're going to hold town halls and access?
Look, I'd like to. There are so many ways in which you can contact me, get your input in, and receive feedback back from it. So there are emails, there are letters. Call my office, 202-225-0453. My staff is ready to talk to them. I read most of the emails on the flights back and forth, which is really fun. I read the answers we have to them, so there are a multitude of ways in which you can make this contact. Town halls is only one of the methods that can be used.
I know both of you have held town halls that have received some outbursts in at least one of them.
Oh, yes.
So,
yes.
So you have come home to face some tough crowds.
That's part of the process, but whether you're visiting at the Chamber of Commerce or going to a city council meeting or people coming to D.C., or we have district office in the 3rd District in Cottonwood Heights and in Provost, so there's a whole variety of means. And it's hard. We represent more than 800,000 people, so it can't necessarily have an individual conversation with everyone, but we try.
I would also like to say that I've held many town halls, whether it's in a business or whether people that are calling saying we'd like to meet with you. We've done teletown halls, but we've also done quite a few of small group town halls because you can actually get a dialogue back and forth. To me, a town hall is when people are able to have a dialogue. And I've seen something lately that has really been disturbing. There's a lot of civility that has been absent from the process. To me, when people get into a room and they talk about what they're for, that's American democracy at its best. When people are able to provide some thoughts back and forth and really come up with a solution. When I did a town hall last year with the Citizens Climate Lobby, we had quite a few people that came in, but we had people that were really looking for a solution. And not only did they change my mind, but they changed my heart about some of the issues that were really concerning to them. And it's allowed us to move in a direction that's positive.
Well, and I would just add one thing quickly, and that is I know that, these people here, and I know that every one of us are committed to understanding what our constituents want, what's on their minds. I think we have a really good idea of what's on their minds because of what Rob said. There's so many different ways that they communicate with us. Like Jason, I had a very boisterous town hall in Salt Lake City,
right.
and I feel a responsibility to do that, but at the same time, I left there frustrated, and I think so did a lot of people because there wasn't much dialogue. And I think people deserve, and I think they expect that.
Well, that's the good thing about tonight. No one's shouting anything, but we'll get to a number of issues. By far, the most questions we received from viewers deal with health care, the repeal of the Affordable Care Act and the creation of the American Health Care Act. The topic is complicated, and it showed when many of our health care questions came with multiple parts.
Right. All four of you voted yes to repeal and replace Obamacare. Our first question on this topic comes from Jason Stevenson of Salt Lake City, and he asks, the nation's major healthcare and medical organizations, including doctors, hospitals, and insurers, as well as organizations such as the American Cancer Society and AARP, oppose the AHCA. Does it concern you that the people whose job it is to run our healthcare system and provide care for patients do not support the bill? Representative Stewart?
Well, I mean, for every organization that doesn't support the bill, I can find you another medical organization that does. And many of them supported the original Obamacare and then later came to regret it because of its lack of access, because what it did to premiums. And we go back to what the president promised, and I think this is a good place to start this conversation. President Obama promised us that if you wanted your plan, if you liked your plan, you could keep it. He promised us that you could keep your doctor. He also promised us an average savings $2,500 per family. And finally, that it would reduce the deficit. None of that was true. We know that now. That just simply wasn't true. And all we're trying to do is to make this better for people. And I think that's just, I would say that again and again and again. We are trying to make this better for people. And there's sometimes this presumption that we want to hurt people or we want to make it more difficult or take away their care. That's absolutely not the case. We're trying to help them. We think we can do it better than ACA or what a lot of people call Obamacare.
And the estimates that you've seen, how many people, for instance, in your districts might lose their health care?
Well, you know, there are a lot of people in my district right now that do not have access to their health care. This is something that they've been asking for 7 years. I remember, I mean, I'm the one that's fresh off of, you know, heavy campaigning. And I even had my opponents that were like, you know, we don't like the Affordable Care Act either. We think that we need to have some changes there. We have families that have high deductibles, so they can't even take their children to the doctors. We have families that have to pay a fee who do not have access to health care, so they're paying to not have any access to health care. About a third of United States counties right now have access to one insurer, and you've got 70% of United States counties that have one or two insurers left that are covering. So the problem is we're losing the ability to have access to health care. That's the main issue here. And I have to say, one of the things that has been really important to me is I don't take the congressional health care. I stay on my husband's plan because I felt like it was important for me to feel the pressures of the private health care. So, you know, pre-existing conditions, all of those things were really important to me. My brother was diagnosed with stage 3C colon cancer in December. He's 44. We wanted to make sure that, you know, he was able to move jobs if he needed to and not lose his coverage. So this is in keeping the promises we made to our constituents and making sure that as many people have access to health care at the lowest cost possible.
Well, speaking of cost, a lot of folks have written in asking about the cost of this new plan and whether it's going to cost more than the current one. What say you?
Yeah. Well, we hope that it's obviously less, and we think it will be less. That's our whole point, is for it to drive down the cost by using market forces to drive down the cost. I would mention two other things. I talked with a woman coming home from Washington last week, and she was in tears, and I really felt bad for her. She was so frightened because her son has a pre-existing condition, and she'd been told about 10,000 times right over the last 2 or 3 months she was going to lose that. And I had to assure her it's just simply not true. And I say, and I'm so disappointed and shame on these people who are telling people you're going to lose coverage because of this plan, because it's just not true. This plan does protect those with pre-existing conditions. And I want to go back to something Mia said really quick, because she has this option of having insurance through her spouse, and that's great. Right. The rest of us are actually on Obamacare. We have to be on Obamacare. There's a lot of people who think we carved out a special exemption. Quite the opposite. We and all our staff have to be on it. We know how expensive it is. We know how high the deductibles are and how hard it is to get the coverage we need.
That was something a lot of people responded to.
Yeah, Jeffrey Herr of North Salt Lake asked this question. As a show of solidarity with the American people, are any of the members of the Utah Congressional delegation willing to forego using the health insurance provided to Congress and instead use the health care that'll be available to the rest of us in the AHCA? And again, there were a number of responses. Jason, what do you got?
I'm on Obamacare and I hate it, right? My premiums went up, my deductibles went way up. I had a pre-existing condition. I'm dealing with one right now with my foot. You've been kind enough to let me prop it up behind this little barrier here. But we have to have access to health care. All of us are committed to that on both sides of the aisle. That's not a partisan issue. Right. But you also have to be able to afford it. So one of the things I've been personally working on, we've all worked on different parts, is dealing with the pharmaceutical industry, because pharmaceuticals have just skyrocketed. And we've had hearing after hearing trying to expose that and change the way the FDA is approving these types of drugs so people can not only have access, but they can actually afford it. And they don't have to make these really difficult decisions in their life because the healthcare budget in their family is taking up so much. So I'm on Obamacare, and I hate it. That's why I'm fighting so hard to get rid of it.
Is the Senate going to pass this?
Oh, gosh.
It all went through. It went through your group. Is the Senate going to pass it?
Of course, something will happen in the Senate. And realize that the vote we had is just the first stage, the first step in this process.
Right.
There are other reforms that will have to be taken place through HHS. There are other votes that have to be taken that will require 60 votes from the Senate. So we haven't finished the process, we're just starting it. But I think we've all seen the same thing. We're all on Obamacare, we're all on Social Security. It has to be that way. But for the last 4 years, I have been getting letters and emails from people who have been harmed by Obamacare. They've fallen through the cracks. They're forced to pay for things that they do not want. Their hours have been cut so because of Obamacare. One of my neighbors lost his job because the employer could either pay the mandate from the government or hire people. He chose the mandate. So I cannot look at him without saying I have done everything possible to reform this system, Obamacare, which is designed to fail. It cannot survive. It is simply unsupportable going forward. And that's why I'm more than happy to make sure that we move forward to do everything we can to reform something that will fail and harm, and has harmed people and will harm people in the future.
We'd spend all half hour talking about this, but we want to move on to another topic that a lot of people have expressed an interest in, and that's the future of the Bears Ears National Monument. It's now in limbo because of a review ordered by President Trump. Keeping public lands high on the list is high on the list of concerns for Utahns.
News specialist Ladd Egan spent the week in southern Utah.
It was a big week down here in San Juan and Kane counties as politicians and protesters followed around Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke as he toured two of Utah's most controversial national monuments. And as we met with people very passionate about this issue, they had this to ask of our representatives in D.C. Adam Dennison wants to know, what kind of guarantees can state leaders give to ensure that public lands stay public and are not sold off to the highest bidder if the state takes them over from the federal government?
Representative Bishop, I know you were one of the members there. Why don't you take that question?
You know, that is an easy one to do. I mean, Utah's a public land state. It will always be a public land state. Federal land is not necessarily the only kind of public lands there are, and the key element is access. Federal lands have the least amount of access, and they are the quickest to be closed to people. State lands have a far better track record. So specifically the question was asked there is no incentive for the state, if it has control of these lands, to actually sell it off. More importantly, in the legislation that Jason and I sponsored, and you guys also signed on it, we specifically prohibit the sale of these lands. It will always be for a public purpose. So yeah, you have to remember that federal lands and public lands can be the same thing, but are not necessarily the same thing. And the state has a wonderful track record in providing access for people to the lands, a far better track record than the federal government has.
And let's also remember, we're fighting to make sure that Bears Ears is rescinded. I think that 1.35 million acres is a massive overreach by a president who was never here, will never come here, and refused to even meet with us to even talk about the issue before he made this executive order. So I would like to see it rescinded. Let's pretend that actually happens and that Donald Trump, the president, does that. It's still federally protected. It's still a federal land designation, and it still has those protections as it had before this designation. So for me, it's about multiple use. It's about, just as Rob Bishop said, it's about access. And I think what you'll see in a monument is you're going to have less access. Hunting, grazing, all these things that are very true and dear to Utahns, your ability to go out and enjoy that, all get impeded by the movement to a national monument. That's why we're fighting so hard against it.
Representative Stewart.
Yeah, you know, if I could just add two things. I was with Secretary Zinke down there for several days, and one thing becomes clear, and that is he and I believe President Trump are like every one of us here. We recognize these are special places, and we do want to protect them. There's a reason that we choose to live here in Utah, because we love Utah. I love to rock climb. I love to ski. We want to protect that for our children. But one other thing, and this often isn't talked about, and that is the impact this has on families. It's not just the impact on the environment, it's the impact it's had on families. And the fact that families who grow up in rural Utah can't stay there. because there's no jobs for them. They end up moving along here to the Wasatch Front, adding to our congestion and the number of people here when they really want to be back home. And all we're trying to do while we work out this compromise is to find a way where we could protect the land, but also offer these families economic opportunities so they can live and have a family where they want to be.
Let me just throw in a follow-up question for all of you. Following the Interior Department visit, this is Andrea Rodriguez from Holiday. She's asking something that has a lot of people have on their minds, and that is, what would you think Secretary Zinke should recommend from his review regarding Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante National Monuments? Representative Chasist, you've already said rescind.
Yes, but in addition to that, I would also suggest that we need overall reform to actually fix this problem long term. So if we can take the Antiquities Act, get it back to where it was supposed to be. The Senate has a bill that would actually require the concurrence of the state legislature in order to designate a monument in the future. That's something we need to get done as well.
You know, one of the things that I think is really frustrating in this process is people are frustrated because they feel like they don't have their voices heard, because this decision is being made by one person in the White House. And to be honest with you, I think that the biggest issue that we have is Utahns want to be able to have a voice. We want everybody to come to the table to talk about what area is appropriate, what should we do, how do we continue to give access. One of the things that I brought up, I hope my colleagues don't mind me talking about this, but one of the things that I brought up is, you know, when we come together and have a plan, maybe we put it back in the hands of Utahns and say, you guys choose, put it to a vote, talk about what we need to do. And so these are the things that we've talked about. We are all on the side of Utahns, and I think that what you will see here is that we are trying to get the decision making as close to people as possible.
So what do you want? Rescind, change, leave the same?
I think we should rescind it and give Utahns a chance to do it.
Member Stewart?
You know, I don't know if I would love to see rescission, but I don't think that's politically possible. But I do believe, and I certainly hope that we do something that addresses the boundaries of it.
You think they'll shrink it?
Yeah. I mean, I hope they do at least. And remember, President Clinton didn't come to Utah. He didn't dare come to Utah. He stayed in Arizona and said, "I'm creating a almost 1.8 million acre national monument over there." And that's just an awful lot. Look, we flew around in a helicopter for more than 2 hours and never left the boundaries of the monument, not even close. It's an awful lot of land.
Rescind, leave the same?
Rescind and replace. Look, Jason already told you there is no more protection with this designation than there was before or will be afterwards. It was sold on the idea that the Native Americans who live in Utah would be able to control that land. That's not part of the monument designation. And it was also sold that they would be able to maintain their traditional practices. That's not part of the declaration, and if you look at the history of monuments, that access has been rescinded. What I want to, and I think we all want to do, is rescind it. Let us pass legislation that would provide all three of those, because you can only do it legislatively. So really give them control over that particular area and guarantee in statute that the access and the activities that they want to maintain will be maintained in the future. And that protection will be there. That's the best thing to do.
And we have to make sure that everyone comes to the table, and I think we all agree to that. I mean, outdoor groups, environmentalists, we all want everybody to come in and talk about what we should do and what it should look like.
But along with public lands and health care, we have one other top issue in our three here that people are concerned about, and that is Russia and the FBI investigation. Alicia
Smith asked this question: why is there hesitation about conducting an independent investigation regarding possible conflicts of interest Trump has with Russia? Representative Chaffetz, let's start with you. We see you talking about this all the time.
There are a lot of investigations that are happening. Senate Intelligence Committee, House Intelligence Committee, which Chris Stewart is involved and engaged with. So I've been doing stuff in the Oversight Committee regarding General Flynn and others. So there has been a lot of activity that has actually gone on in that. But I would also suggest that there hasn't been exactly the smoking gun about collusion, that some law has been violated. And I challenge the Democrats who all flee and flail their arms about how bad this is. Where were they on Benghazi? Where were they on the Obama administration? Where were they on this newfound commitment to principle, openness, and transparency? I love it from the Democrats. I'm glad they're finally coming to the table. But it is a serious topic. There are a series of investigations that are going on. They take time in order to do it. But I think that is the role of Congress. That is the role of the FBI. That is the role of the various investigative bodies, and that is happening.
Representative Stewart, you wanted to add in here. Is there a hesitation?
No, there isn't. And well, I guess let me say there isn't hesitation depending on what question you're asking. But I want to say this. I came back from Moscow last summer. And I said it many times into the press, they're going to try to mess with our elections. It was just very obvious they were. It wasn't based on any particular intelligence briefing. It was just based on we knew how they operated, their active measures, as we call it, and what they'd done throughout history. But it wasn't necessarily to have one person or another elected. And so I agree with Jason. To my point right now, sitting on the committee, having had dozens and dozens of hearings about this, there's nothing right now that indicates there was this collusion that has been suggested. Now maybe we'll find some, and the investigation will continue. But my point is that the House is capable of doing that. So is the Senate. The FBI is involved. But I got to end on this. Vladimir Putin, who is nothing but a KGB thug, has to be just thrilled with what has this done. But because it has become so partisan, it has divided us in so many ways. It has broken down the trust in the foundation of democracy, and that's exactly what they set out to do.
Do the four of you support a special prosecutor in this instance?
No. Look, you have
a lot of questions, and we hear that a lot. I know all four of you hear that a lot.
No, you have special investigators, and that process is going on multiple fronts. You have a prosecutor established when a crime has been found. That hasn't happened yet. As soon as there's a crime found, then you can have a special prosecutor. This is still in the investigation phases, and we have it happening in the House and in the Senate and the FBI. There are multiple investigations going on. And that's why I think there's a difference in the questions that are being asked. People are confusing prosecution versus investigation.
Right.
Investigation has to come first, and it is happening.
Okay. Our next question focuses a little closer to home, and it comes from Hannah Bradshaw from Sandy.
My name is Hannah Bradshaw, and I'm 11 years old. I love Utah, and it's clear that we have an air pollution problem here in the Salt Lake Valley. We can see the trapped pollution during our winter inversions, and I am forced inside during recesses for weeks at a time due to the air quality. I know the bowl we live in increases our pollution problem, and I feel that Utah should be going above and beyond in regulating polluters and trying to come up with solutions to the obvious problem that affects all Utahns. Why are you not doing more to protect the health of your constituents and the environment we live in? You also have agreed with the president in loosening regulations on mining companies, making it easier for them to pollute our air and water. How is this good for the future of Utah?
A sharp constituent there.
Maybe with a little help from a parent or two.
Probably so. But Representative Chase, your district lies in coal country, so we'll have you address that first.
Yeah, I believe in all the above in terms of energy solutions. I really do. I believe in that coal is part of that, and potentially nuclear. I want wind, solar. Very first bill I passed in Congress was a hydroelectric bill that was coming out of Strawberry into Utah County. So I believe in all of the above. That's how we get those solutions. But I also do believe that Utah has to take the lead in developing solutions for Utah. You come here during an inversion, it's tough. It was like that before there was the massive population, and it's exacerbated by the fact that we're throwing a lot of stuff into the air, into our water and whatnot. Utah has got to come up with those solutions. We don't have some one-size-fits-all Washington, D.C. solution. Utah has to take that lead.
You know, first of all, I am a mom, and I am a Utahn. I'm also a runner. And it really doesn't take a rocket scientist to walk out and realize that there are times where I can't enjoy the beauties of the landscape. I love running. Right. It's one of the reasons why I run, because we live in such a great place. And I can understand the frustration and wanting to do more. I think it's a false choice to say it's either or. I am on the Climate Solutions Caucus because I want to find solutions. I think it's important for us to be good stewards of the land that we live on. I think it would be inappropriate for any of us to say that, you know, we don't want to do anything about this. I think that there is a problem, but I don't think it has to be at the detriment of our economy. I don't think it has to be, you know, at the detriment of our energy producers. I support clean energy. I think that Utahns and all of the different facets out there can come together and say, what can we do to make sure that we are part of the solution instead of being part of the problem?
I would add two things if I could. I'm so proud to represent downtown Salt Lake City, and that's perhaps impacted more than other locations are. But you have to recognize that the Native Americans called this valley the Smoky Valley hundreds of years ago. because even from their own fires, when the inversions would come, they would get the smoke and it would settle within the valley. And we don't produce any more pollution than Portland or Oklahoma City or any other city that's about our size. We're not worse at it. We just have this inversion in the mountains, and it makes it harder for us. And the second thing I would say is you could eliminate all of the coal, and it's not going to fix this problem at all. I mean, nearly a third, it's about 57% of the pollutants in the valley come from our automobiles. I'm sorry, about 2/3. About a third comes from our homes. And so its industry is less than 10%. So again, you could eliminate all of the coal-fired power plants, and it's not going to fix it. It's going to take something much more than that.
Another repeated question that has come to us over the last week has to do with politics over people.
I would ask Jason Chaffetz where the limit to partisanship is and when he begins to prioritize the benefit of the nation as a whole over that of his party.
Now, Matt's question echoed again by Larry Evans in Springville, who asked, what is it going to take to get Congress on both sides of the aisle to stop playing partisan politics and start doing what's good for America? Representative Chaffetz.
Well, look, we're supposed to have good, vibrant debate. That's the way Congress was set up. That was the whole premise of having these discussions. You have to look at each individual's record. I mean, if you look at what Elijah Cummings and I have done, the ranking Democrat on the committee that I chair, he and I this year alone have done more than 300 letters together. But it's not going to be on the front page of the Deseret News. It's not going to make the top of the KSL newscast, because it does happen. You just don't report it. You want to report the fights that are going on.
Not always, but
yeah, I mean, that's what, you know, you want to see the blood and guts, and I get that. That makes good television. What I would hope that people would do is responsibly go back and look at the fact that I have passed more than 20 pieces of legislation, almost all of which are overwhelmingly bipartisan. From immigration reform, which most people don't realize, to things we're trying to do on prison reform and other things. We need to, you know, people need to look at the individual records.
Representative Bishop.
Sorry, I'm the history teacher here.
Yes.
And implied in that is that things are worse today than they ever have been. If you go back to the history of Congress, it has always had a partisan divide, and it has been much more vicious and violent than it is today. The bottom line is all of us do what we think is the right thing to do. And that's not necessarily told to us by the party. We look in the mirror every day and we say, what is the right thing to do? That is always going to be the highest priority. And then we look at what our constituents are talking to us, and then we look at what the party is talking to us. But the first issue is you have to be true to yourself. Am I doing what I think is the right thing to do? And if people want to say that is partisan, I think you're overlooking and oversimplifying the issue. And you're certainly not looking at the history of Congress.
We've got time for probably one last question here, and it's maybe fair to represent some of the minority parties. One of the people that called in or that wrote in asked us from several Utahns in minority parties who simply want to know, are you listening?
I would like to ask, how much do you listen to the other side, the Democrats, the liberals, who have strong feelings but not a very big voice?
Anyone willing to have a dialogue, I have listened to. I represent not just Republicans, I represent independents and moderates and liberals.
And you said they've changed your mind.
And on several issues. There are places where we're not going to agree, and that's okay. I don't agree with my husband all the time. But, you know, I think the people have seen that I've actually listened. They know I have met with them face to face, and I appreciate their input.
I think I have probably the most diverse district of them all. I represent downtown Salt Lake City, as I said. I represent rural Utah, southern Utah. It's my responsibility to try to understand what people are feeling.
All right, our time is out. And unfortunately, 30 minutes is nowhere near enough time. But we did want to make an effort to represent all the questions and the people who took the time to answer or to ask for questions and answers.
Thank you for watching. We'll see you back here tonight at 10 o'clock as we continue on the road to understanding it. Thank you all for being here with us.